Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again. This is Eric Cavanaugh. I'll be your host and moderator for today's web presentation. We're talking to Zettaset about the big data ecosystem. This is part of course, our whole big data ecosystem market overview at InsideAnalysis.com. So we're going to be talking about what Zettaset has done and kind of where it fits in that whole ecosystem. We'll be hearing from Jim Vogt, President and CEO of Zettaset, and also Sesh Ramaswamy, who will be doing a demo. So with that, Jim, I'm going to hand the keys over to you, and the floor is yours. Let us know what you got.
Will do. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having us back. So what I'm going to be going through today is not just the ecosystem within the open source, but the ecosystem components that are required to really drive enterprise adoption of this technology. And if you look at Hadoop, it is really a group of open source components and projects. A lot of good people are working on it to flesh it out and get the right functionality within the open source itself. But there's other vendors like Zettaset that are focused on putting other things around it that allow for the enterprise hardening to essentially deploy this in a live production setting. So this is more around not just technology issues, but real business issues in terms of compliance, application reliability, data integrity, scalability, and repeatability in terms of scaling the store over the next several years. So that's what I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with you things that we're seeing in the marketplace. I'm going to share with you other things that other people are seeing as far as analysts, and we'll have a good round of discussion here. So just to start off on a lighter note, there's been a ton of hype around Hadoop, and people get pretty revved up pretty easily around the technology, as the cartoon shows here. And I think it makes 2 points. First of all, the real thing driving the value in this infrastructure is the analytics. The second piece is that it's a framework, and it does something very useful within the open source itself, but until you put the additional components in the open source and around the open source to really drive a solution, that's what's going to get the market to go. So if you look at Hadoop today, it really is truly in its infancy, and I think many of the first drivers in terms of people looking at this technology was the cost savings and the flexibility in scaling the store. And that's where it started. But it really does have the potential to underpin all of the key and critical business operations, but there's a lot of things that need to happen in terms of fleshing the full solution out to make that happen. But that's exciting for the technology overall. And if you look at what it's going to take to make this a primary data store, not an adjunct data store, one that's in addition to stores that exist today, you're really going to have to scale the full stack in terms of functionality around the reliability, the security, the high availability, repeatability, the things that I've mentioned. And it's got to be consistent at the application point, and it has to be consistent at all points of access within the ecosystem itself in terms of security and high availability. So those are the things that I think we have to strive for as vendors to create in this technology to get it adopted. So if you look at slide 5 here, you know, we're seeing as a vendor these same stops in terms of people evaluating versus deploying the technology. And actually, Merv's making a lot of the similar points here, and it's still weak in many spots in functionality in terms of really being a robust data center type solution. And there's several vendors working to solve the problems. There's problems that need to be solved within the ecosystem itself in terms of the open source components, and outside of that ecosystem and a broader ecosystem in terms of the things we have to put around the open source. And if you look at this next slide here, this is a study that was performed by IDG, and I'll explain that the light blue bar was the response a year ago, and the blue bar, the darker blue bar, is the response this year. So we're making some progress. Security is still the key issue and the key stopper in terms of actually deploying the technology. The good news is it looks like people have found a little more budget for this, and it's starting to move up the priority list, which is good. People are still concerned about the number of resources that are needed to deploy the technology, and I'm going to mention that in a slide coming up in terms of the mix of monetization in the market today, which is predominantly pro-serve, which needs to change. But also the development time, I think in terms of the ease of deployment of the technology has made some strides, and so it is easier to actually deploy the technology. And the last point I want to make with this slide is that people are still struggling with how do I integrate this with my existing environment. So as an old enterprise guy, you know, the saying goes that there is no such thing as greenfield. So you always have to integrate with something that's existing within the legacy environment. So that's another challenge that people are facing, and I think the better job we do of that, the more integrated and the more mainstream this technology will be. So if you look at slide 7, essentially, slide 6, the big issue here is security, and security in itself is a living organism. So you're not just done with security after you've built encryption or first stages of encryption or RBAC and a lot of things you're reading in the press. It's a living organism that's continually under attack, and essentially you have to be able to adapt and improve your system as time goes on so that you can address these thwarts. The second thing, though, is that breaches are expensive, and the main ones we've had this year around Target, around eBay, around Michaels, is that these are not just expensive from the point where you have to replace credit cards and that costs you millions of dollars, or it costs the CEO of Target his job. You know, if you look at how much money was spent in Internet commerce in the first quarter of this year, it was $72 billion. And what we've seen in multiple reports is that people are losing confidence, and they're essentially not buying as many things and transacting over the web. In reality, brick and mortar or going to a store versus the web is maybe only 10% more secure because everything is linked to the Internet. But people are losing faith, and that faith translates real dollars. If you look at the market where it is today, essentially this is indicative of the adoption of the technology. So, you know, if you look at how people have monetized the money in the early spans of the market today, it's been mainly pro services. And people have needed help. You know, the open source has been developing, and essentially it's been a lot of hands-on. The issue is that's not going to scale. That's not going to be affordable. And as the open source matures, there's going to be less monetization within the open source itself and more monetization in the actual software and hardware that surrounds the technology. And that's what people want, because that's what makes it repeatable. That's what makes it scalable. And essentially that's what people are needing. Also, if you want to go downstream in the market to SMB or even mid-tier, this is what they're going to need. They're going to need affordable technology that they can access and potentially access in the cloud. That's something else we're going to talk about. And so this has to shift. And the fact that the market is stuck in this type of monetization pattern is indicative of the early stage of the market. So there is real synergy between big data and cloud. Big data is really the key use case for cloud. Cloud is about the flexible deployment of low-cost resources on demand, tying in through API other data sources, being able to analyze that data through other APIs and other analytics. So it's a very flexible use of the big data application. The issue, though, is the same issues that we're seeing in the data center are doubly accentuated in the cloud. So if you think about multi-tenant environments and mixing of people's data, maintaining privacy, high availability, performance, all those type of things are even further accentuated in the cloud. And the cloud opens up a broader market, as I mentioned, to the SMB. Let's look at what the analytics guys care about, and this is actually a pretty short slide because they care about the same things that we've been talking about on the infrastructure side. They care about security, they care about reliability, performance. These guys are really very used to, the same features or the stability, if you will, that they see in a relational database environment. So what they're expecting is the same maturity, same reliability, same security in this new store, and that's what's going to let it take off. The reason that they're really thinking about this as a key opportunity is it presents itself really as a new store for these guys. New stores means more data, more analytics. So it's pretty simple. But essentially, this is becoming a very key differentiator, if you will, in terms of what you can do with this data. And it's really reached a point where it's evolve or die. So essentially, people have to have access to this data. They have to have it in a reliable and a secure manner. And essentially, there's real value in the data. So just to sum up, the same things that the analytics guys are looking for in terms of comprehensive security, response time, high availability, data access, and a very easy-to-use graphical interface, being able to turnkey this stuff, repeatable, scalable, easy to use. That's the same things they're looking for in terms of the analytics and the infrastructure that underpins it. So essentially, they're thinking about things at the speed of thought. So as I have a question, I can actually get an answer to that question from any data source that I need to give me the answer. So let's look at some use cases. And if you look at the big things here is basically, the data is directly proportional in terms of the wealth of the data to its sensitivity. So the overarching opportunity is to tap this data source for better decisions, but can I do that without compromising compliance? And so the compliance that's driving this is HIPAA and high-tech around healthcare, SOX BSA around financial, and the retail PCI DSS. So these are hard compliances. In addition to the risks that I talked about in terms of security breaches, their hard compliances actually driving the application of the data here. So on the financial service side, basically what they're concerned about is transaction history and fraud detection. And so they're looking at that and buyer behavior. And obviously when you look at that type of problem, there's a couple of issues. One is the size of store, enabling them to store all that data and analyze that data. And Hadoop is much more flexible and cost-effective in that extent, but essentially you can't compromise on compliance and security and what would happen if that information fell in the wrong hands. If you look at healthcare, it's the first time in my career as an enterprise guy that the healthcare guys have been the first to the trough. I mean, they're typically a little more conservative and essentially take a little more time to absorb new technology. In this case, the issue is that they've got so much, a whole wealth of this type of data, meaning unstructured data sources that they want to tap. They can use that for patient profiling, fraud detection, all kinds of useful stuff, but there's sensitive information in that data that they have to protect, and they have hard compliance around HIPAA and high-tech. If you look at retail, essentially, if you're looking at retail and buyer behavior, you're looking at transactions, which means you're looking at very sensitive data that's interlaced in that information. So it makes it very sensitive. Secondly, high reliability and availability is key to these guys because they're doing 24/7 transactions. So the monetary loss in a data center going down or a cluster going down is very real to these people. So again, enterprise hardening around the open source is very key in providing a solution to these guys. So that's been pretty quick. I'll wrap up very quickly. But I think that, essentially it's the analytics, it's the business applications that are driving people to look at this type of solution. They're looking for comprehensive security. They want it simple. They want it repeatable. They want it non-resource intensive. They want high reliability across all services, not just specific name node or open source components. They want a comprehensive solution, and they want something that's enterprise ready. So my last statement would be, and I think I've said this before, I say this humbly, but our piece of the puzzle is probably the least glamorous, but the most needed to make all this go. Because if you can't build this type of store, and if you can't bring Hadoop into the mainstream, essentially why are we even talking about the analytics? So that's the state of the market. That's what we're seeing. And I'll hand it back to you, Eric.
Okay, good. And I'm going to hand it over to Sesh. So Sesh, go ahead and go to that Quick Start tab in WebEx, top left, and you should be able to share your desktop. And go ahead and give us the demo. And then maybe when we're done, Robin or Rebecca may have some questions, or maybe myself. And with that, Sesh, go ahead. I see your desktop, so let it rip.
Thank you. Welcome to the Zettaset demo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the install process real quick. Support whatever Jim said in terms of simplicity, easy to install, high availability, role-based access control, security, and things like that. So that's what I'm going to walk you through. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is the install process. So the install process is very simple, repeatable. No professional services needed. As you see, the install is done through a web UI. And it walks you through multiple screens, and you just click, and then you get the install done with the Hadoop distribution of your choice. And then in addition to that, if you see here, you have the centralized logging, data at rest encryption, data network encryption, which is data in motion encryption, and Nagios, which is the alert mechanism, and then the applications like HBase, Hive, MapReduce, everything gets installed automatically. So there's a lot of automation process that goes, behind the scene. The Hadoop administrator has to simply click checkboxes. He doesn't have to know anything. Everything is taken care of by our automation. Unlike some of our competition, which uses pro services, which are very error-prone and not repeatable. So this also extends to when you expand the cluster by adding additional data nodes. When you want to add more HDFS space, or your jobs are taking more time, you want to improve performance. When you expand your cluster, security gets expanded along with our add node option. So everything is very simple. In addition to this, we also have Active Directory integration at the time of installation. We have Kerberos, which is very key, and most of our distributions find it difficult to integrate into the distribution. We do it at the time of the installation, and when I show the HA, the HA goes across all the services, not only for the Hadoop components like NameNode and Resource Manager. So that's the power of our installation. Install time typically for a 10 node with all these security features plus the application, it takes around 40 minutes for a 10 node cluster, around 140 minutes for a 53 node cluster, including security, applications, and Hadoop distribution of your choice. So this is the power of our installation. As I said, it is simple to start, easy to install, and it is fast enough to get the cluster up and running. So now I'm going to go and show our role-based access control and HA in action. So what you're seeing here is a Hadoop cluster, Zettaset 7.0 version running with HDP 2.1, which is the Hortonworks distribution. So if on the left-hand side, if you see, the services are listed, and all services are in HA mode. Especially the new Yarn-based Resource Manager, which is in HA, Uzi, Node Manager, Name Node. All the services which can fail, which can bring the cluster down, are all made in an HA. So our note about our HA is the HA framework is so easy to bring in services, and the patent that we have got approved is for removing the split brain syndrome. Typically, when a master node goes down, and you have a typical HA in process, and then another node gets selected, but suddenly if the administrator sees one of the master node going down, if he starts the service, you might have a situation where you will have two masters running, and the cluster is getting confused. So we have a patented technology that removes the split brain syndrome, and the HA is available across. As I said, Job Tracker or Resource Manager or a Name Node, these are all Hadoop components. However, there are other components like Kerberos, Key Manager for data at rest encryption. Those are all again very key to the cluster. Even if Name Node is available, if Kerberos goes down, you have a cluster down situation. That is what our HA framework across all the services helps the Hadoop cluster to keep going without any manual intervention. What I'm going to quickly show here is I want to show you a live failover of Resource Manager, so that you can quickly see how our HA really works. If you see this KRB5 is the Kerberos, Name Node is a typical Name Node, Hadoop Name Node, and Uzi is a workflow service, and that's again available as a HA. So what I'm going to do, you see this Resource Manager, they are running as a master, candidate, and candidate. Typical installation of Zettaset HA requires a 3-node configuration to start with. You can either go with 3, 5, 7, depending on the redundancy and the data size of the cluster that you have. Now you have one of the nodes running as master, remaining or waiting for election. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to force this Resource Manager master to go down, so that you will see how we elect another candidate as a master, so that the jobs can still continue to run while the Resource Manager node went down. So you see the node 1, stopped, and node 3 became a master now. So if I go and see, I'm seeing the service has stopped, so I'm going to go and start the service and see whether it is becoming a master or it's becoming a candidate. Look at so this is just waiting for an election. So that means it is seeing already a master running, so it doesn't, promote itself as a master, although it was running a master service in the past. So this is our, split brain syndrome that possibly will occur if you don't have the prevention for that in place. So the HA, as I said, is across, especially for Hive with our BI connector. Jim was talking about analytics. For users who are querying Hive server from a remote, place with the BI application trying to either run a report or trying to query the database. If if the HA is not there, with the automated failover is not there, if Hive service goes down or the database that is holding the Hive tables goes down, the BI user is left high and dry without able to, getting its report done. Whereas in this case, what will happen is the automated failover will kick up and then have the report and the query going on without any problem for the BI user. So that's the benefit of our HA from cluster-wide perspective, not only for Hadoop component perspective. So I'm going to now go back to role-based access control that Jim was talking about in terms of access control for the data that is in HDFS and Hive and HBase and any other application that the administrator possibly installs on the cluster. So we have a fine-grained role-based access control. So we package 5 roles in the product out of the box. If the 5 roles are not enough, the administrator can go and create his own role so that you can have a fine-grained access control for the applications that are going into the cluster. For example, you go into the manage roles in the administrator menu. You see a bunch of roles already prepackaged for the user. In case if this is not enough, you can go and create new roles and then apply certain permissions for the role. For example, you want to have somebody running only MapReduce, you can create a MapReduce operator and have certain permissions applied to the role. So it is so fine-grained. We have organizational units, administrator, normal user, cluster administrator, and cluster data analyst role. These roles, they come from the Active Directory that was integrated at the time of installation. The way that we bring on users is, mimic Active Directory that you have the enterprise already set up. In a typical IT or software industry, you have organizational unit that I have listed here, and these units have been added by the administrator for the users to log on and start using it. The key thing here is the groups and the user information that you see in the drop-down is brought from the Active Directory that got integrated from at the time of the installations. So this is exactly what we pulled. You don't have to create the policies as Jim was saying. We integrate into the existing IT infrastructure so that the administrator life is very easy, so that the policies extend themselves to the newly created Hadoop cluster that Zettaset Orchestrator is running on. So that's actually a role that an administrator can go and create. And you can also have users that can be created locally and authenticated locally by the Zettaset Orchestrator database, in addition to the Active Directory and LDAP authentication mechanism. So what I'm going to do now, since I'm an administrator, I was able to see I have overwhelming privileges across the cluster. Now I'm going to log out and log in as a normal user and show how our MapReduce UI and our Oozie UI extend to the normal user. So this user belongs to a multiple organizational unit. And you can see this he is going to have access only to the data that he has access to. He doesn't see anybody else's data. So this is our HDFS browser. This is so powerful that you can see, the users that log on to the cluster need not even go into the command line. They can see the, the HDFS file system from our browser like this. So you can go and apply permissions on the directories and on the files instead of going into command line and trying to figure out how to change read-write permissions. You can click on the folder and you can go and apply permission. That's the power of our UI here. Now the user has logged on. Now what is he going to do? He is going to run some MapReduce job or UZI workflow. So this particular user has already run has created MapReduce job here. You have to bring your the jar file or whatever mapper and reducer class you have here, and then simply save the file, and it is going to run the MapReduce job. So you don't have to depend on class CLI, but although you have all the role-based access control extended to CLI as well. But this makes the life of the user very easy. For example, the UZI workflow here, it's so easy to go and walk through right from the ETL process to the actual MapReduce Hive query, and then come up with analysis on the data set that has been created here. So when I go and run the UZI workflow, it's going to run the entire flow right from ETLing the data and then running the MapReduce, and then the Hive query and things like that. So when I log out and log in as another user, this user is not going to see any of the data that Alan has created. That's our powerful RBAC in action. For example, now Alan has already created the UZI workflow. UZI workflow is running. Now he logs out and goes up. And now I log in from another organization unit called HR, and HR1 is the user. Now I log in as HR1, and I want to go and use my my data set for running MapReduce job or Hive query. Now, if you see here, he doesn't even see engineering or QA, that organization unit that Alan was seeing. So when HR user logs in, he only sees that particular user's data. And when you go into MapReduce, he doesn't even see the MapReduce job that Alan was running. So this is the role-based access control. So from the HDFS, it is file and directory level. At the MapReduce, it's at the queue level. And if you want to click on the UZI workflow, he doesn't see the UZI workflow that Alan had created. So that's the protection there from UI. Now, if I want to go and show the same thing from command line, so as Alan, I'm trying to run this jar file. This is a MapReduce file, and I'm able to go and start the MapReduce from command line as well. So the other thing I wanted to show real quick is the HBase that we provide in terms of column family, cell level, permissions on HBase table. So this user on the command line is the same user, Alan, and he has given permissions for users called Sesh and Tim on the employee master table with a different column family. For Sesh, the column family name is a read-only access for him, but whereas if you see Tim can see the salary column family level from the HBase employee master table. So both at the command line as well as at the UI, you can have the role-based access control. So the other thing that we wanted to show is, at the administrator level, which user is having what sort of permissions and where is he coming from, right? So if you see Alan is coming from engineering and PM organization unit, and he has got admin role in engineering, a normal user role in PM, and he has got different access for permissions for HDFS, different permissions for MapReduce, Hive, and HBase, and so on. So this simple UI will solve the problem for administrator to see who has got what access across all the applications against each of the user and the roles. So in addition to that, the logging mechanism that we have, will make sure that the policy that has been enforced is being met by the audit and the logging mechanism. The logging server that when I showed you the install screen at the time, you select a centralized logging server, and then what happens is whether it is 3 node or 3,000 nodes, all these logs go into this logging server, and from a single UI and from the administrator perspective, you click Manage Logs, and then you come into this screen. So the facility here is whether it is you want to see whether Hive permissions have been changed or HBase permissions have been changed. You can come and filter for those from the centralized logging facility here. You can either select the node, you can filter the information per node, or you can filter the messages per services, whether it is job tracker or name node or web service that you want to track and look for the log messages. You can filter like that. Or you can have a date range and you wanted to filter messages from a given start and start date and end date and the start time and end time, and then apply. It's going to filter the messages for you. So the logging facility is centrally stored and centrally monitored and centrally queried. You don't have to switch UIs, unlike the other distributions that are in the market. So the end-to-end, in a summary, you have a fast deployment. You get security in terms of curb rows, data at rest, data in motion, and you get all the applications that extended. The security gets extended to the applications that gets installed. Plus, you have the fine-grained role-based access control for all the applications, including Hadoop's HDFS, and then any other NoSQL like HBase or Hive Metastore, and this gets extended to the BI connector, where a situation where the BI user connects to this Hive database. So the role-based access control, like this as an Allen user or HR1 user trying to access it through the JDBC or the ODBC connectivity through BI connector, the role-based access control gets extended as well. And then the HA and the role-based access control, it gets extended so that you have real access control on the database, whether it is native to the cluster or outside connection from outside the cluster. So that is pretty much it I wanted to cover today. Back to Eric and Jim.
That was a fantastic demo, I have to tell you. I really appreciate you kind of hammering through all that, but you really did an excellent job of showing all the bits and pieces that go in. So I've got a couple of questions, and maybe someone else has a question too. But just to kind of understand overall what you're doing, basically you guys have created a management shell that goes outside the entire Hadoop ecosystem, which thus allows companies to have things like security and governance and visibility into who's doing what. Is that a fair assessment?
I think the only other word I'd add to that, Eric, is transparently. That's why we don't work with any specific distribution of the open source. We work with all of them. And we allow people to have choices whether they're running on HTTP or CDH or raw Apache. We give them a choice of distributions, and so that is fair. And I think the other thing that you touched on is, since we're sitting at that point in the stack, although the specific technology we're applying this to today is Hadoop, we've created a framework that we feel that we can apply over time to other NoSQL technologies. And the first one that we showed here today was HBase.
Okay, this is great stuff. And just because I have you guys on the line here, something I think maybe a lot of people don't know about Hadoop and all these different distributions is that, at least theoretically, you're supposed to be able to have even one cluster set up to have multiple different versions, right? Like you could have a cluster set up with both Cloudera and Hortonworks nodes on it, right? Isn't that supposed to be the case?
Well, that could be possible, but the problem is that they're managed under different entities, right?
Right.
So the Cloudera guys would not be managing the Hortonworks cluster, if you will, or the Hortonworks nodes. That would be managed through either a separate tool or under Ambari. So that's the problem, is that Ambari really only manages HTTP, and Cloudera only really manages CDH. But at the end of the day, those are just open source distributions. So our view is, no matter where you start and what distribution you start with, essentially you can manage that with our product. It gives more choices, because not all the distributions have the same components in them in terms of not just components but version of components, and so it's a bit of a mess. So being able to kind of take that off the table and let people choose whatever version of Hadoop they want to work with, essentially that allows us to essentially come in and help them with this feature set that is not existing in the open source.
Yeah, that's right. And you've really, I like the term hardened, because that's what you guys are doing, right, is you're providing the bits and pieces of functionality that are required for enterprise caliber software. And traditionally what has happened is vendors like IBM and SAP and Oracle and all the rest, Informatica, and you could name probably 150 others, they are the ones who provide the soup to nuts version of their software. But what's happening here is you've got these open source movements which are doing great stuff, no doubt about that, but still, let's face it, it's not in their best interest at the moment at least to harden specific aspects of this. They're just kind of going as fast as they can to roll out and improve functionality that does specific things, but those specific things do not include, at least at the moment, stuff like the hardening of security and governance and transparency, right?
That's correct. And I think there's lots to do within the open source ecosystem itself, and you hit on that. And I think that there are a lot of people that are inwardly focused on the open source itself, and it's just a matter of focus. So that's good focus for us too, because that ecosystem needs to get fleshed out. We need to get that thing to have more functionality in it, to have ease of use and access to data and data integrity and all those good things. But, you know, they're not focused on, other vendors are not focused in specific on some of the features and some of the functions that we're addressing. And at the end of the day, we all benefit if we can get more eyes on Hadoop, and more importantly, we get people to move from 10 and 20 node clusters to production where it's more like 200 and 2,000 node clusters. So that's the issue that we're addressing. One other thing that we're addressing is that at the state of the software today, if you have a major new release of a distribution, you know, the issue is that you have to pave over the cluster, meaning you have to reinstall everything. And that's okay when you got 10 or 20 nodes. That's not going to be okay when you have you know, huge data stores sitting on as much as 1,000 nodes in a cluster. That's going to be a big disruption, and how do you save the data while you pave over it, all those kind of issues. So one thing that we're focused on is how do we actually provide more of a component approach, where if there's a new open source component that gets updated, you don't wait for it to be contained in a new distribution, you basically just update that component. So over time, as a vendor, we're trying to really separate the functionality between the open source and the production environment in a way that you don't absorb the instability of the open source. So that's another thing. And one last thing I'll add to that, there's been a ton of hype around 2.0. There are people still running a lot of 1.x clusters out there. So this is an issue for them. And basically making that migration from 1.x to 2.x, which a lot of people aren't talking about, is really going to get people to actually deploy, because some people are waiting for the stability of 2.x because they're worried about 1.x, 2.x upgrade. 1.x uses Job Tracker, and 2.x uses Yarn. So we actually, in our software, we support in one stream of technology all the 1.x users, and we support in another stream the 2.x users, and then we're working on a means by which we can migrate them without having to pave over the cluster.
Yeah, that's fantastic stuff. Yeah, Robin?
Yeah, there are a number of things here that I find, really, if you like, quite interesting. It does look to me like the use of Zettaset as a security package is actually fairly not actually that difficult in terms of the imposition it is in terms of managing the cluster. Often an objection to security is that it impacts performance, and of course it's bound to impact performance to a certain level. What do you know about the impact of Zettaset on, well, let's just imagine a typical kind of Hadoop job.
Yeah, so if you're looking at just data at rest encryption, which basically is doing partition level encryption for the threat case is somebody actually physically removing and taking a server. That's less than 3% impact of performance. Where it starts to get tricky is if you get more granular in terms of all of the controls on keys per user down to block level. So as you start to deepen the security element in terms of the granularity of the encryption that you're implying, that starts to have more of a pronounced impact on performance. We're thinking at that granularity it's somewhere between 8 and 10%. Now, our job as a security vendor is to figure out means by which we can actually do data in motion and very granular encryption with having comparable performance levels as the static encryption. But that's what we're working on in terms of our phase 2 encryption.
Right, so that's ongoing in terms of what you're doing to. I mean, I'm not. Do you actually have any competition in space? I'm not aware of any competition in space, but I'm well aware of the need for this kind of thing. There are a whole series of what I would call commercial sectors, banking in particular, but also I think the health sector would be that way. The insurance, health insurance particularly. That they're not going to use Hadoop in anger without actually this level of security. I mean, this is actually quite fine-grained security. I was quite surprised as you went through it. In a way, I mean, I know you've already presented to us, but the demo makes it, the level of the security in the demo just came completely clear to me watching it. I thought it was brilliant. It demos very well is probably what I would say. So, that's my kind of perception. What are you experiencing in terms of level of demand for this?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because it just, again, points to the state of the market and where we're at. A lot of these people last year that were evaluating the technology, in my opinion, were doing it in unsecure environments. And so what happens is that's more of a technology evaluation of Hadoop, if you will, and how we can use it and map reduce and apply the jobs, blah, 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 all that good stuff. Now, this year, what we're seeing as early as January was the new, the new infusion of the requirement around security. And what that means is that people are getting more serious about, hey, I like this, I have a business need for this, I have to deploy it in the data center, though, and I have compliances and other things that I have to meet within the data center that I need to meet before I can actually deploy this stuff. And we've had some banks that, told us, hey, we're going to go to 400 nodes, 1,000 nodes last year. They're still sitting on 20-node clusters, mainly because a new person is involved around security, setting requirements on that and higher reliability and some of the hardening things that we talked about. So that's actually, we're seeing very good demand in evaluation. And hopefully, as these guys check off their list, this year, we're going to see some more deployment. So still predominantly evaluation, but a different set of requirements from what we saw a year ago and something we anticipated as Zettaset.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we've observed as well. An awful lot of Hadoop usage is actually usage in proof of concept type of things or in kind of sandbox applications where they're testing out to see if it works. They aren't, there's a lot of Hadoop out there that's not been put into production. And you can get away with, doing an awful lot of work on Hadoop and not putting it into production without any security. But as soon as you actually put it in production, especially in sectors that have got any kind of regulatory overview, you really actually have to have it. I mean, it's just not really acceptable without it. So I presume you'll see, a boost in that in the coming couple of years. I mean, the thing that we've noticed is that once Yarn came in, the level of enthusiasm for Hadoop, and I know it was there in terms of, it was very fashionable, but now, in terms of, it looks like we're going to be using this indefinitely into the future. That's what we perceive.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And my own comment around Yarn in 2.0 is that it's new, which means it still has some stability and growing pains we got to work through and so forth. And you got to think about how you're going to get people from 1.x to 2.x. But I think that Yarn as a resource manager shows a lot of promise. People are very interested in it, but there's still a lot of people still running Job Tracker 1.x out there that you have to take care of as well. But I think Yarn is the future, and that's why we're supporting it in our product.
So let me just ask one more question, and this is obviously a very difficult question to answer because there can be, you know, various sizes of implementations for Hadoop. But how much overhead, just in terms of man management of the environment, do you think that this kind of security places on a Hadoop installation?
Like I said, it depends on the granularity of your encryption and the types of controls you want to put on the data. But it can vary anywhere from 3 to 10%, depending on the encryption levels you want to apply. It's kind of you get what you pay for, and the more granular you want to be in protecting the data and the roles and the access and so forth, the more overhead that heads to the job. But essentially, that's kind of up to the user in terms of how they weigh those priorities and benefits. Now, in the meantime, we're going to try and whittle that number down as low as we can in terms of providing fine-grained encryption and access control without, you know, severely impacting performance. And that's just a development task we'll take on now that we have the base elements in place.
Okay. Well, I haven't got any more questions. Anybody else got any questions?
That's it. This is a fantastic demo, guys. I'm really impressed. I'm a little bit surprised that you haven't seen more focus on this. I know that the big guys, Hortonworks and Cloudera, are focusing on it now, but you know how the game works in enterprise software. If you get a head start, if you have a lead, it's kind of hard to overcome that lead for the competitors. So I say good for you guys and well done.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think this is, you know, there's been so much hype at the market level, and I think what Seth showed you today was what real fine-grained RBAC is. And we read it in the press, we read it in the news, but this is the real thing in terms of how you have real fine-grained control on multiple stores. You know, that's what people are looking for, and we've been at this for 2 years. And so we've had our head down as the market's been developing, and we've been finishing out the product, and we've been focused on the number one issue, which is security, along with other hardening issues, but the number one is security. And, you know, we're able to deploy 50 nodes in 45 minutes. You know, so being able to repeat that process, apply policy once, and then actually scale it across a growing cluster, those are the things that people are looking for.
Yeah, that's right. Well, folks, have been talking to Jim Vogt and Sesh Ramaswamy of Zettaset. Well done. Thank you so much for your time. We'll catch up to you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.